Well, 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 well. I go away for a couple of weeks for a holiday, and everyone assumes I'm dead. Thank you. Um, no, genuinely thank you for all the messages I received that were checking if I'm okay. No, just went away for a little bit. Hadn't been away in 2, 3 years, however long it's been. Had a lovely time, missed a couple of fights. In fact, honestly, I think I've got about 40 hours of fights to catch up on. I heard Bobby Green and Islam Makhachev had a war for the ages. I've got to watch Jorge Masvidal lose in exactly the same way we all thought he would. Honestly, with that fight, I was actually in the airport and I checked what happened, and I wasn't really interested in the fight or the results of the pay-per-view. I was interested in the Abe Cower drop. I want to know what Abe Cower's saying. And Abe Cower did an amazing pep talk backstage where Jorge Masvidal looks like he couldn't give less of a shit about Abe Cower being there. And Abe Cower's going, he came to wrestle. You came to fight. Hold your head up high because you won. He only wrestled. And Mike Brown stood next to him just going, why do we have this fucking idiot in camp? And Jorge's even more stuck because he's married to the Cower's sister, isn't he? Imagine your idiot brother-in-law having to be both your corner and your manager to make your wife happy. Abe Cower of saying the N-word as a white man is brave. Fame. But what else did I miss? Oh, yes, people were messaging me about some lad on the Bellator card. Won or defended some kind of regional title? No, honestly, I was actually getting a massage at the time, and the Google alert came through. The two Swedish blondes who were working on me said, "What's the matter, Mr. Slack?" And I said, "Get out," and quietly screamed. No, Gegard Mousasi beat Mr. Van Zandt, was the first fighter with a Wikipedia page on Mr. Van Zandt's record, and then announced he's the best middleweight in the world. And for about 3 days, the dumbest people in the MMA scene agreed with him. Because they just watched Israel Adesanya versus Rob Whittaker, which was a good competitive fight. And then they were like, yeah, but neither of those guys knocked the other one out in under a minute. Whereas Mousasi... But then that's what it takes to believe that Mousasi's the best middleweight in the world. Don't want to watch him get 49-46'd by Sean Strickland. Nope, better keep him over in Bellator. But there was some other stuff in Bellator that I need to watch, actually. Adam Borix, who is decent, actually beat Mads Bernal, which makes him very decent. So I need to watch that one and catch up. And then I heard that Ankalaev and Thiago Santos, another guaranteed banger on paper, turned out to be dog shit. So I got all of that to look forward to. But I made it back just in time for what turned out to be an absolute banger of a card in London. First one in London in 2 years, I think. And this was the one that they were saying, oh, we'll do Uriah Hall versus Darren Till. And everyone was going, no, please don't. That sounds awful. But they didn't. They did Tom Aspinall versus actual world-class heavyweight in the main event. And that delivered. And a couple of other good legitimate fights on there. And a ton of awesome stoppages too. So we're going to run down that one, and I'm going to tell you what I enjoyed and what I didn't. There wasn't an awful lot I didn't enjoy. Only Elise Reed versus Corey McKenna because I didn't watch it. Let's start at the top. Start of the night, Mohamed Mokaev versus Cody Durden. I feel like Durden had said something stupid in the past, but I can't remember what. But Mokaev, interesting story, came to the UFC as a refugee. Sorry, came to the UK as a refugee when he was very young. Was only 5-0 coming in against a guy with 15 fights. And did a great job, just chinned him with a jumping knee within the first seconds, grabbed a hold of a guillotine in under a minute. It was very impressive. It's one of those ones where you don't know what to make, because I'm seeing him in the light that a lot of people saw Paddy Pimblett for the first time. I knew all about Paddy Pimblett's career and what he's good at and what he isn't. But people who hadn't seen him were like, oh man, what an exciting fighter. He could go all the way. Whereas I'm now seeing Mokaev for the first time, and I haven't seen, his fights in Brave CF or whatever it was. But he's only got 5 under his belt, so it can't be that much. Whereas Paddy Pimblett was in Cage Warriors. Was it Cage Warriors? Yeah, Cage Warriors for years and years and years while we were going. He probably should have made the jump by now. But then that brings us on to when is the right time to make a jump in competition and so on. And that's going to be interesting when we start talking about Tom Aspinall, because he very specifically said he didn't want a top guy, and then they booked him against a top guy anyway. So not a whole lot to say about that, but obviously keep your eyes on Mokaev. I imagine people will, because that highlight It's very easy to play on repeat. About the length of a Twitter clip. I'll do Jack Shaw versus Timo Valiev later because I didn't get anything out before this fight because I was still travelling around, but this was my pick for sort of like technical, probably most meaningful fight on the card that isn't one of the top two. And this was going to be my one to watch. And it wasn't, I mean, it did have its moments of excitement, but it wasn't an all-out banger, but it was very fun and technical. So we'll get into that later when the people who are only interested in my big, not very technical thoughts are gone. The drop-off in the episode. But other good stuff. I mean, Sergei Pavlovich smoked Shamil Abduramakil. I can never say this guy's name. Shamil. But everyone smokes Shamil nowadays. However, Pavlovich is on a great little run. In fact, he's on a great little career. His only loss is Overeem. And that's so interesting because that was Overeem very much in decline, very obviously in decline, very deflated. But that fight, Overeem just battered him everywhere. You know, Pavlovich is supposed to have the edge in the boxing, but every single part of the game, Overeem just dominated him. And also, Pavlovich looked so huge in this fight, and he looked tiny next to Overeem. And I think that was also to do with how he was sort of shrinking into himself as Overeem just bullied him. But that win for Overeem aged very well. I mean, Overeem is thoroughly washed, but going back and watching that again, very impressive when you consider what Pavlovich has done, before and after that. Man, all of these like sub 1 round stoppages. McCann Amirkhani versus Mike Grundy. This was a funny one because McCann Amirkhani, all you need to do is not lose in the first round and then you'll win. Like that's the whole thing with Amirkhani. His cardio is shocking for a professional fighter. More so that he is like grappling McGregor. I mean, you know, they both worked at SBG and they don't actually have any treadmills there as far as I know. No, I'm just fucking around. He puts everything into everything he does in the first round. So even if you watch his fights with like Barboza, with good people like Shane Burgos, he's picking them up and throwing them on the mat in the first round. Even if he's like not really got the takedown, he's still lifting them off their feet to try and swing them around. And then the second round, he just goes off a cliff, just is useless, just stands there getting beaten up. And in the third round, he's normally got his hands on his knees and he's diving for shots and then laying on his back. But this one, Mike Grundy just jumped headfirst into a head and arm. And McCann Amirkhani punched his arm all the way through to the armpit, caught his own bicep, locked up the anaconda, and Grundy was sort of on top of him in a way that the anaconda can work, but it's quite hard to finish. And Mike Grundy did a roll and rolled through into the both looking up at the ring lights position, which is where you can really tighten up the anaconda, because that's where, I always mention Rafa Mendes, but Rafa Mendes basically invented the diving anaconda and using your own legs to tighten the anaconda. So if you've got the anaconda choke grip in, the way you tighten it is you have to push their elbow across their own centre line or towards their own centre line. And to keep pressure off their neck, they have to get their arm out. Like any other arm triangle choke or triangle choke, actually. You know, the pressure is on one side from one of their limbs blocking your carotid artery, and on the other side from one of basically your shoulder being pushed into your carotid artery. So the further you can get your arm away from your own head, the more like breathing room you get. But when you roll over in the anaconda into that looking up at the ring lights sort of position where you're both looking upwards, the guy who is applying the anaconda can bring his legs up and use his knee to hook your elbow and push it across and tighten up the choke, which is what Brian Ortega's been doing a lot in MMA. And that's where you saw the submission come in this one. But good for Amirkhani. I mean, he's very good in the first round. It's just that it's not even like, I imagine he's working his conditioning like a madman, but the way that he fights also really doesn't help him if the fight goes beyond the first 6 minutes or so. But we got really in the weeds there. Sorry, I didn't mean to get into technical positional stuff yet. Ilia Topuria versus Jai Herbert was an all-out war. Loved this one. Absolutely brilliant. And coming in, I was speculative because Jai Herbert, all he really has is a 1-2 and a good high kick. And as I was thinking that in my brain, he threw a 2 and then threw a left high kick as he pulled back and knocked Ilia Topuria down to the mat. It was fantastic. But what I really liked from Jai Herbert in this one was that he was showing knees all the time. Not all the time, but often enough that Topuria couldn't feel comfortable, and often enough that if Topuria did shoot, there was a good chance he'd dive onto a knee. Didn't see an awful lot of uppercuts from Jai Herbert, which I would have quite liked because he was so much taller, so much longer, and Topuria's going to try and drop on his hips all the time. But I think the knee was probably a safer bet because you want to keep your hands up because Topuria's going to come in swinging. But the 1-2 looked sharp as always. I mean, Jai Herbert has always lived and died by his 1-2, which is, it's one thing for me to say that that's all he's got in that sort of deriding way, but there are great fighters who've won world titles in boxing and even in MMA with just the 1-2. It is the most useful combination in the sport. Fuck. On the subject of SPGI rather, John Kavanagh famously said, well, the 1-2 is the most common combination in striking, so you should never throw it, or something to that effect. I think what he was trying to say was clever, but it came off really silly, and lots of people now meme it. But the 1-2 and the 2-1, are the basis of good straight hitting. And most people can get them off much quicker than they can other punches. Plus, if you've got an 18-inch reach advantage, you're going to be largely safe from the other guy for most of it. Takedowns were interesting because Jai Herbert, I thought he actually did a decent job on the fence, given how strong Topuria is. There was a flagrant fence grab, but it didn't seem to play into the direction of that wrestling exchange. He was sort of grabbing it, and Topuria picked him up, and he'd already let go of it by the time he was in the air. It wasn't like he was holding himself up with it. But yeah, the fence stuff is something that we're talking about a lot at the moment. If you want to check out the Filthy Casuals Guide to Islam Makhachev, which I put out a few weeks ago, we talked about how the overhook is going to be really important along the fence now. Guys hitting the whizzer throws off the fence because everyone wants the underhook and because you're trying to keep their knee out from between your knees, and there is often an opportunity to step through and throw them with the whizzer, maybe not all the way over, but at least onto their hands so you can get out. And Herbert was doing a decent job of using the whizzer, blocking Topuria from getting the knee inside, and then trying to, when Topuria changed off on the single, he'd try and defend in more of that traditional pull them up off your legs style. And you saw with Topuria what you saw with the lad that Paddy Pimblett fought, and a lot of other guys recently. The guy who Shavkat fought recently. When you block them out from putting their knee in between yours, when they got the underhooks along the fence, they'll try and step around the side and trip you with an outside trip, and it's going back and forth in between those, not really committing to one, but just showing them both. And that's what Topuria was doing lots of until he finally got on the crotch grip and picked him up, I think it was. But yeah, Herbert did fine on the ground. I saw he was making lots of scrambly exchanges, because the thing you don't want on the ground is to get trapped underneath someone, with no movement. Movement really helps the bottom guy because he can spin around, put his knees back in between him and the top guy, and that's what Herbert did. Got a body triangle from closed guard, looked good, but the stoppage came. I thought Herbert was doing well, and then the stoppage came because Topuria slipped inside a jab and cracked him over the top with the right hand. Standard practice for dealing with straight hitting. You want to slip the punch and arc across the top, the cross counter. Or slip the punch inside, come back with a left hook. It's moving through the straight hitting, or rather getting your head past or under the straight hitting and then looping over the top or coming up inside. And that cross counter is the one that makes Herbert sort of forget where he is, because you don't see him visibly wobble or anything, but the moment it happened, I went, whoop, because he started backing immediately onto the fence. And he'd been so active moving around before that, he just sort of not stood still, but stopped moving side to side and just backed up onto the fence. And that's a telltale sign that someone's hurt, or at least trying to deal with the effects of something like that, or that they're about to bite down in their mouthpiece and fight back. And that's what he did, because Topuria then came in, threw a three-piece combo. Herbert's along the fence, back foot to the fence, can't go back any further, isn't circling out, and got into an exchange that did not favour him at all. And Topuria made the best of it, caught him with a beautiful overhand that just took Herbert out, knocked him out and threw him through the air, basically. Topuria, great job, because he immediately went to like a knee on belly, running around Herbert as if Herbert was going in for his leg. So he did the right thing in an instant, seeing where Herbert's head was landing, but then immediately realised he was already done and didn't hit him again, which I always appreciate. Obviously, you can't always see it, but like the Dan Henderson, Who else was famous for it? Oh, Derek Lewis. That just jumping on an obviously unconscious guy. It's not great. Don't really need it. But honestly, I thought a really good showing for Jai Herbert, who's I wouldn't even say he's been bad in the UFC. I had sort of mixed expectations coming in because I thought he was very limited in what he did, or rather minimalist in what he did. The Trinaldo one wasn't bad, but he got smoked in his first UFC fight. Got done in round 2 by Renato Mokaev. But then he beat Karma-Worthy, sent Karma-Worthy out of the UFC, which was sad because Karma-Worthy's good. He gets knocked out a lot because he's got a really bad chin, but he's very awkward and can beat better guys than you expect. But yeah, I mean, I wasn't super sold on Jai Herbert, and I thought this would be probably a cakewalk for Ilia Topuria, and he made Ilia Topuria's life very, very difficult for a round and a half. Molly McCann versus Luana Carolina. I mean, it's women's flyweight. It's not going to be good, but I've always had a soft spot for Molly McCann because she's nice to me on Twitter, but I always say she's just funny and scouse. And, I remember talking about Rosie Sexton back in the day. Promising MMA fighter back in the day. I'd say pioneer, actually. Fought Gina Carano back in the day. Was also an osteopath and a mum at the same time. So she was kind of a pioneering figure in sort of the women's MMA, and certainly the British women's MMA scene. And she made it to the UFC, had mixed results there, but she's since retired, and she's now, I think she's a councillor. She's some kind of, she's a politician, but she's for the Green Party, and she... I think she ran for their leadership too. So, she's solid. But she put up a nice thing on Facebook after this event just saying that, Molly McCann and Paddy Pimblett were both her training partners when she was having much more success than the two of them were at the time. It's just really nice that they're getting their moment. Neither of them beat really good fighters, but they did get to do it in front of a not quite hometown crowd, but national crowd, and they're getting a ton of hype off it. And to be fair, Molly McCann's knockout was spectacular. You don't get a lot of those. And she'd gone for it earlier in the fight, like almost all spinning back elbows. Someone goes for one first, and then they go, I'll try it again. And it's always worth doing because it's one of those ones that the payoff is so spectacular. It's not even that bad to fuck it up nowadays. I think it's worse to miss a back kick or something like that because people will jump straight to your back, or they'll get a back body lock and you're still sort of on one leg for a lot of it. Whereas with the spinning back elbows, I've seen guys hit it or miss it, and the opponent goes to grab around their body, and they just do the standard wrestling, break their hands apart and turn back to face them. Tony Ferguson against Donald Cerrone is a great example. Both those guys were getting past their best at that time, but Tony just keeps turning his back, hitting the elbow. Donald keeps trying to grab his back, and Tony just separates the hands and moves away again. Or John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson. Or Ricardo Ramos. Not a top level guy by any means, but he can abuse the spinning back elbow because, in fact, he does abuse the spinning back elbow. He just gets fixated on it and does that almost exclusively in many of his fights. But he's never really made to pay for it. He's always able to get his head back in front of the opponents and turn to face them. I'm coming round to it in terms of it not actually being that high risk a move, especially as so many people's takedown defense or wall work in MMA now is built around turning your back and separating the hands. Your only real issues are if you get someone throws up a head kick or something, a la Josh Thompson, Eve Edwards. Can't really do a lot about that. You are literally turning your back, but if you're in a wild exchange with someone, it's well worth trying. Or especially if you feel them bulldozing forwards over and over and over again, which is what Molly McCann did here. But good for her, gets her first finish in forever. I think 2018 was the last one before she was in the UFC. I mean, she's always game, and her boxing isn't bad, especially in that division. Keeps a high pace, moves around a lot. Her weaknesses have sort of been in the grappling department. She's quite small for that weight class. She did pick Carolina up several times, but Carolina's quite... her centre of gravity was so high compared to Molly McCann's that every time she stepped into punch, Molly McCann could just Samoan drop her, basically. Before we get into the Paddy Pimblett hype train, Gunnar Nelson versus Takashi Sato. This was odd. Yeah, I mean, it was always going to be odd because Gunnar Nelson hasn't fought in forever. When was the last time he fought? Gilbert Burns back in 2019. Yeah, he lost to Leon Edwards and Gilbert Burns in the same year. And he somehow missed out on cancelled fights against Thiago Alves and Claudio Silva, who are much easier opponents in between those. But yeah, I think the momentum sort of stopped with Gunny on the Leon Edwards one, because the Santiago Ponzinibbio one, people could convince themselves that it was because Ponzi, gouged his eye out. But Leon Edwards, yeah, it was a split decision, but I remember Leon Edwards really making him look bad for a lot of that fight, and then Gilbert Burns did make him look bad for a lot of that fight too. I mean, he's always been good. He's just sort of there's a few things he does really, really well, and then there's habits that he has that you can constantly see coming back, and good fighters will exploit that. And especially one of them is that his whole striking game is often standing open stance with the opponent, so southpaw if they're orthodox if they're southpaw, but he'll also go closed stance as well. He prefers to work with his left foot forward, but a lot of the times he gets southpaw opponents like Edwards and Takashi Sato. But he checks the lead hand, bounces a bit, holds his right hand out by his chest, and then he'll either throw it straight or loop it round. But the idea is to just close with that one big punch, and if he knocks him out, fantastic, but his goal is to clinch off that punch. He's a great example of punch and clutch. He's a great example of how to wrestle if you aren't going to try and drive through people on big shots or pick up singles or anything like that. If you just want to do short level changes or get into clinches, Gunnar Nelson's karate is a great example of how you do that. Does mean that he does sort of just have the one thing over and over again. He doesn't really use combinations. He doesn't have an awful lot of pokes on the outside. And the other thing is that he's up on the balls of his feet through round 1 and much of round 2. And then without fail, in the third round, he's flat-footed and opponents can start backing him onto the fence and so on. Takashi Sato was hesitant to do anything, but if you watch that third round, Gunnar Nelson is standing completely still and trying to guess when punches are coming at him. And if you were fighting someone good or someone really gritty, like when he fought Rick Story, Rick Story just took it to him in rounds, because that was a 5-rounder. Rick Story took it to him in rounds 3, 4, and 5 just because Gunnar couldn't keep up. And that's I was going to say a bug, not a feature, but that is a feature of the on the balls of the feet, blitzing in sort of karate stuff. You're bouncing around, your calves are going to get tired, you end up flat-footed. Happens to the best of people, even people like Kyoji Horiguchi. But in this fight, he was constantly able to throw the right straight or the right sort of looping punch, and then he'd either grab the underhook or he'd grab a collar tie, and then he'd wrestle his way to the back. And he ended up on the back for long periods, wasn't able to finish. Finishing from the back can be very hard, especially in a strict technical sense. If you're not turning the eye belly down and just punching the shit out of him all the time, it's very difficult to finish guys from the back with gloves on, because it's so easy to hold onto a wrist. Whereas no gi grappling, as soon as the guy grabs your hand, you start putting it back over his shoulder. Your hand, is just a sweaty bag of bones that is going to squeeze together as it comes through their grip. Whereas if you've got a big glove, that doesn't change shape. That's just there. But yeah, it was good to see Gunnar Nelson back in action. I think I saw a lot of people being happy for his win, but also a lot of people aware that it wasn't the most exciting performance in the world. He did what he always does, which is nice that he hasn't lost that. He looked a bit thicker and bigger than he used to be. But it's very funny that on this UK card, Gunnar Nelson gets a fight, Leon Edwards doesn't. And it almost seems like the UK crowd have accepted Gunnar Nelson as an English fighter more than they have possibly the best British fighter, technically, that's maybe ever been in MMA. Because Leon Edwards is very elite, technically. It's just he doesn't have fun finishes, and he's not a personality that people like. But when you watch that match between Burns and Gunnar, I mean, Gunnar was able to mount him at one point, but Edwards and Gunnar. Edwards is a particularly bad matchup for Gunnar Nelson's particular style of getting people down, because Gunnar Nelson punches to the clinch, and for a lot of people that's going to be a real surprise, because they expect grapplers to be ducking on their hips and all sorts, or pushing them to the fence. But Leon Edwards has made his career in the last few fights, at least, by beating people up in the standing clinch. So large portions of that first fight, Gunnar gets an underhook, and then Edwards stretches it out, and Gunnar's side on with his arm fully extended, still trying to keep this underhook, while Edwards is trying to line up elbows and knees. Oh man, I just remember the Damian Maia match. God, that was domination. Because we all thought, because we're all aware that Gunnar Nelson is a very good grappler, even in a pure grappling sense. He did very well at ADCC in the time that Damian Maia had left grappling and become an MMA fighter. And then Damian Maia just styled on him. But anyway, as I was saying, good to have him back. Let's get on to the one you care about, Paddy Pimblett versus Rodrigo Vargas. Now, If you know Rodrigo Vargas, you're doing better than me. Because it was just some guy they brought in they thought Paddy Pimblett could beat. And he still got dropped in the first... Well, not dropped. He got chinned early and shot for a takedown and pulled guard off it, feeling that he wasn't going to get the takedown, which is always brave. Paddy Pimblett, if you're familiar with his actual style, and by actual style I mean if you've watched more than just the one fight he's had in the UFC, a lot of what he does, he used to wear the Sakuraba shorts, but a lot of what he does is kind of Sakuraba-esque in that he grabs onto single legs and ends up in prolonged single leg holding sort of grindy scrambles. Not scrambles in like the active explosive sense, but more both guys are going, wait, how do I advance from here? and sometimes he gets hit and does it, and the other guy's trying to wail on him and it's just not really working, so he ends up grappling with Paddy Pimblett instead. I mean, he always had... His career has been made as a grappler, basically. The knockout in his last one misled some people, but Rodrigo Vargas caught him early. He pulled guard. He then did a nice stand-up along the fence with the overhook, but we'll get into nice stand-ups later because Jack Shaw versus Valiev, they were... The grappling in that was airtight. But Pimblett scrambles up, has the overhook, and then as we were talking about along the fence, guys are so used to now. It was a game-breaking new meta to get the underhook, step your knee to the middle, and hip throw off the fence. The Habib method, the DC method. Luke Rockhold did it a lot too. And now it's about keeping guys' knees out of the middle and trying to hit whizzer throws. And Pimblett did it. He did a beautiful hip, what's it called, a Haragoshi? No. I'm not sure what you'd call it, but a hip throw where you take out the far leg rather than the Uchimata, which is between the legs. Flipped him over, got on his back, got the choke. Job done. Hype train continues. I think a lot of people are aware that even the people who are liking the hype are just more interested in him as a character. And he does have interesting fights. The weird stuff is comparing him to Conor McGregor, because Conor McGregor was genuinely a phenomenal fighter coming up. And a lot of people didn't believe it because he was such an abrasive personality. But if you were watching it objectively and you knew what good fighters looked like, you were going, I mean, he's very promising. Whereas with Pimblett, you've seen a lot of sketchier moments already. Now, there's nothing to say that he can't become a much better fighter. You know, the reason that everyone continues to underrate Charles Oliveira or make him the underdog in every fight he goes into is because they've seen him lose a bunch. If people, it is disadvantageous to... It's almost disadvantageous to have seen someone come up, because I've seen a load of Paddy Pimblett's fights in Cage Warriors. I've seen him struggle and I've seen him lose and I've seen him get decisions he probably shouldn't have, but he's still growing. He's still a growing boy. You know, he could be a much better fighter and I could be judging him on shit that I've seen in the past, whereas coming in with fresh eyes, you might be going, well, there's a couple of problems there, but, you know, he's still got tons of potential. But now they're sort of like he's trying to say that he wants Topuria, and Topuria's saying he wants Pimblett, and the UFC's going to have to try and get around that, because Topuria seems like a very tough matchup for someone who almost always gets chinned, backs onto the fence with his chin up in the air. I saw someone say, like the fucking bat signal, which I quite enjoyed, and then wrestles when he's in trouble and makes his living as a grappler. Topuria is a very tricky matchup for that. However, if Paddy could be out in the cage and out in the centre of the cage and using his long kicks, you know, I said it before his UFC debut, but his recent kicking game had really impressed me. It's his boxing where he gets himself hurt, and it's completely possible to put together an outside striking game based on kicking and using your hands to parry and check and clinch and using your footwork. And honestly, while having good boxing is a great thing to have in MMA, you can get by without throwing much hands at all and still be a good striker in MMA. John Jones being the most obvious example. But Paul Craig's made it work for him. And on the subject of Paul Craig, call the ambulance. But nay for me. Another classic Paul Craig performance. Ends up on his back early. Did some really nice half guard play. Half guard in MMA always going to be a pickle, because it's one of the better guards in terms of wrestling up, which is what you want to be doing in MMA. But if you don't have the underhook, it's kind of shit. You know, we'll compare this with the Volkov performance in the main event. If you get put in the half guard, the other guy controls whether you can get that bottom leg out and stand up. And if you're trying to use a knee shield to keep space, it's kind of porous. It doesn't really keep you safe that much. You have to use it as and when, and then use the guy punching you. You have to know it's coming and then try and get the underhooks off that. So Damien Meyer is a great example of that. He would use the knee shield very briefly and basically encourage the guy to punch him in the head. And the moment the guy tried to punch him in the head, he'd kick his knee shield up in the air, sit up and get the underhook. But you can't really hold people there, which you see a lot of in pure grappling. But one of the things that has always been interesting in an MMA context is the use of the lockdown, which is something that was sort of pioneered by Eddie Bravo back in the day. If you watch Eddie Bravo's match with Royler Gracie, or both his matches with Royler Gracie, all the focus with Eddie Bravo is on the rubber guard, which is pulling your own legs up and destroying your own knees and back doing it. But Eddie Bravo's game was largely a grinding half guard game, which involved wrestling up most of the time. But the lockdown is a really nice way to both straighten out and sort of torque the opponent's knee when they're in half guard. So you don't have a knee shield keeping them away from you, but you can keep straightening their leg out, pulling it around, making it hard for them to do anything athletic or sit up and punch you. And Paul Craig was doing a great job with not a full lockdown, but with his outside foot trapping the leg as opposed to his inside foot. And what you can do with that is you can keep the guy's ankle outside of his hip, which is it's kind of an unathletic position. You can't really hit very well from there. And whenever he saw the opportunity, he'd try and he'd try and get a knee through and go back to full guard or closed guard as we know it. But Nikita Krylov, who I think I haven't mentioned his name yet, his opponent was Krylov, who I used to be very excited for, but have since gone, nope, just another light heavyweight. But that's okay, because that happened with Ankalaev as well or the other weekend. But Krylov kept chinning him, kept standing in his guard and chinning him before he could lock on a triangle. And then Paul Craig gets hit in the face 3 times, and Krylov gets cocky and tries to backfist him in the guard. And it was like an Aikido move, because Paul Craig just grabbed his fist out of the air and then threw his legs up and whopped him in the head with his legs to get the triangle choke. Absolutely amazing, especially when you watch the pre-fight stare down, because Paul Craig looks like he's going to batter you. But in fact, he's going to make you batter him until he can wrap his legs around your head and get you to agree that he's won the fight. But I love him. I have so much affection and respect for Paul Craig. And he called out Anthony Smith, which I think is a very smart matchup because, well, it could be a smart matchup, but Anthony Smith, a grappler, not amazing takedown defense and far more willing to get into the grappling than perhaps he should be against someone like Craig. Certainly more dangerous on the feet. But Smith had been stifled on the feet by John Jones in his kicking game. So if Paul Craig can do a poor imitation of that and keep him off, yeah, I think that's a very compelling matchup. But it's him and Glover Teixeira now the top ranked for submissions in light heavyweight. You know, I'm fine with him getting a title shot because this light heavyweight is a meme division. With John Jones on the bench or retired or whatever he is, light heavyweight's about the memes. Jan Blachowicz won the title despite starting in the UFC with like a 2-4 record. Glover Teixeira beat him by doing the same 2 things he's always done, but having to go through a gauntlet of being elbowed in the back of the head by 4 young studs in order to get there. And then if Paul Craig wins the title by getting beaten up for 4 minutes 59 and locking a triangle in the last second of the round, then I'm well for that. So does that just leave us with we got Jack Shaw versus Valiev, which I'll talk about in a second, but the 2 top ones, Tom Aspinall versus Alexander Volkov. You know, I was aware that Aspinall was a good talent. I think I was always sort of skeptical, going, well, we'll see when he fights a good heavyweight. But Volkov never got into this. Aspinall looked amazing. Came out hitting with a 1-2-3 off the bat, which is always good because you're sort of going, well, will he be tentative and does it favour Volkov if the fight's slower and more methodical? But Aspinall got stuck right in. I think he came out southpaw to start with and then switched to orthodox, hit him with 1-2-3. Did a nice switch step into southpaw and threw a left overhand, which Volkov stepped inside and gave up the clinch so that Tom Aspinall could go straight through into an outside trip. And he did it so quick it must have been a little thing he'd been working on. But landed in side control by the fence, ended up in half guard on top. And then Volkov's half guard, man, it was not Paul Craig-esque. He was in flat half, basically. Tom Aspinall was framing off his face with his top hand and then just dropping elbows on him. And all that Volkov was doing with his bottom hand, the opposite side to the leg was trapped on, all he was doing was picking his forearm up to his head like a boxing guard and trying to protect himself, which meant that Tom Aspinall could keep putting his knee over the top of that arm, pinning it to the floor, landing an elbow, and then the arm would get free and he'd do it again. Classic Team Quest technique, the mounted crucifix from half guard, because you're never going to maintain it because the guy's got his legs to move you around and there's a bit of space between you. It's not as tight as a side control mounted crucifix, but you will dig in a couple of good elbows while they're getting their hand free. So then Volkov started finally building up on one elbow and got the underhook on the other side, and Aspinall immediately started looking for a Kimura, let Volkov get up, hit him with an elbow and a couple of knees. Then they mucked around on the feet a little bit longer, and it was just very obvious that Volkov was lost. Then Aspinall slipped on a kick and slipped a punch from his knees, which was very fun. They had a good laugh about it, but then you sort of saw Volkov get his confidence back. It was like, oh, well, you know, if I can get a moment, or if he starts to tire, then I'm going to start getting back in it. But when Aspinall was just pushing him to the fence over and over, or beating him up by the fence, he looked very lost. And he was sort of thinking, like, how are you going to get out of this situation? But Aspinall timed a right straight out of Volkov just as he was getting his confidence back, ducked under, got the takedown, ended up in a half guard again, did a sort of a squinting, Limmy waking up face at his own corner, and got some instructions. But then he sat up, wailed on him with a couple of elbows that looked more to make Volkov move than it was to try and force the knockout, because he then immediately dropped down with his head underneath Volkov's arm and used it to get the Kimura grip again. Volkov straightened his arm. Aspinall turned it into a straight arm lock. Very rare to see a finish with that in the UFC, but clearly he was looking for that Kimura grip the entire time, because he'd found it twice in the space of about 3.5 minutes. But very impressed with Tom Aspinall. Always looked quick at that weight. And it's always this case where you're going, well, when he fights a good heavyweight, but there are only about 5 good heavyweights in the world, and objectively good, there's only about 2 at any one time, and then there's Derek Lewis. But yeah, I mean, that went about as good as you could go. You know, you've got a real world-class contender stepping out onto the main stage in the main event of the UFC London card, and he's a British guy. So yeah, that was great. I always feel like, you know, I never really care much if like a British guy wins a world title or whatever, but it is always, I mean, I'd like someone from, it's as exciting for me when someone from Argentina or Uruguay or Mongolia, if they get a UFC title shot, or they get near a UFC title shot or something like that, if we can get the Conor McGregor effect going any country in the world, it's good, because it just brings more people into training, and other combat sports benefit from it too. You know, the little Australian jiu-jitsu revolution came about because guys wanted to get into MMA, and out of that we got people like Craig Jones, Lachlan Giles, these world-class elite grapplers who have innovated within the sport and made it better, and also in turn brought up grappling in Australia. So it's always good when local people have success, even if I don't really rate like Paddy Pimblett's competition or the girl that Wally McCann knocked out. It's good for is it Paul Rimmer and the lads from, I can't remember the name of the team, the Liverpool team. But yeah, it's always good when stuff like that happens. It's why when people are shitting on John Kavanagh or whatever, I always feel like, you know, yes, he says some funny stuff, like Ben Shapiro is the world intellectual heavyweight champion or whatever, but he was also slaving away in a broken down shed, basically, for 10 years before Conor McGregor had any success. The fact that he now has like £1 million gym or whatever, good. You know, he was doing it when there was no money in it, out of passion. You can't hate the man for not producing another Conor McGregor, but he's got a better chance now that there's more people involved in MMA and he's got a proper place to train and teach. Anyway, co-main event was Dan Hooker versus Arnold Allen. I was a little bit skeptical. I mean, I think we were all a bit skeptical whenever you hear about someone doing a big weight cut, especially when someone says, well, I've had some problems, I'll cut weight again. And Dan Hooker wasn't... he really became a remarkable fighter at lightweight. You know, there are people who think he's shit now, but they're just idiots. He's done some great stuff at lightweight. If you watch his fights with like Jacasey, Paul Felder, legit talent. Losing to Islam Makhachev does not make him a bum. And I think people remember the Dustin Poirier fight a lot more one-sided than it was too. But yeah, at featherweight, he never really got much done. And yeah, that could be because he was quite young in his career. And it could be that he was getting better because he was getting better, but it could be he was getting better combined with not having to do the arduous weight cut anymore. He certainly got bigger over the last few years, so it looked like this cut was going to be hard for him. And you never know, because you can see people looking like death on the scale, and they surprise you by how little of their speed or power they seem to have lost, how long they go in the fight. The one I'm always going to use is Jose Aldo, because when he said he was going down to bantamweight, we all thought, one last clutch at straws here, mate. Why are you doing this to yourself? And on the scale, he looked like shit. But come fight time, and ever since, he's made the cut effortlessly. You know, he doesn't look good on the scale ever. He just always looks bad. But he's not running out of gas. He's got no problems with explosivity or gas tank or anything more than he would have had before at featherweight. And he's still one of the very best in the world at that weight. But Dan Hooker, when you saw him on the scale, I mean, I retweeted with the Dorian Yates handsome Squidward picture. If you've seen Dorian Yates, you never know what to take seriously about bodybuilders because they lie all the time. You know, Dorian Yates will say, "Yeah, I did drugs, but I only did a little bit," stuff like that. They'll give you just part of a story and then make up bollocks about the rest. But Dorian Yates used to get completely lean, like cut to diamonds for the stage, and so much so that his face basically changed shape. And that's the photo I used. But I think it was on Rogan, or it might have been. I actually watched a London Real interview because I like Dorian Yates. He's just an interesting guy. But he was talking to some interviewer, and he was saying that he got so thin for a competition once that the pad of fat underneath his heels started to disappear, and it was hurting walking on his heels. But yeah, Dan Hooker looked like that. It was bizarre. But he made the scale, and he wasn't like falling over or anything like that. So everyone was going, "Oh, damn, this is exciting." But then he got in the fight with Alan. And I don't think Dan Hooker's ever been a very fast guy. I would never have characterized him as a fast guy. I'd consider him quite long, and he pokes at people, and he builds up some volume, and he feints really well too. But in this fight, he was going for these long, Alan's southpaw, so he's going for long right straights at Alan, and he's sort of double shoulder feinting his way in and then poking the right straight. And it was just looking so slow and laboured. And that'd be fine if it was just him sort of feeling and trying to build to stuff. But he was leaving it out there, and that's what got him caught. Alan would just reach to parry and then come back with a 1-2. And if you watch the fight, every meaningful connection in that fight from Arnold Allen is a rear hand parry to 1-2, or one and then a big overhand. It's just lean back, reach for the punch, throw 1-2. It's not super technical stuff, but he's very quick, and he's always quick, Alan. And Hooker isn't very quick, and honestly looked like he'd suffered a lot from the weight cut too. But then Alan, once he hurt him the first time, he's swinging wild with both hands straight out from the sides, and gets dropped or stumbled with a left hook coming back, which was funny. But then it was just literally waiting on Hooker to throw a right hand and then coming back with the 1-2 again. So he got the finish. It was a standing TKO, which I'm fine with. This English ref, I don't know his name, but he always goes, "Fight back!" It sounds like someone in a World War I film. But one thing I did like that you got to see in the opening seconds was Arnold Allen is the only good southpaw lead leg calf kicker in MMA right now, or is the only good one worth watching. He does a step up and calf kick with his lead leg, which everyone throws the calf kick when they're closed stance. And if you watch Volkanovski, he'll switch to be on the same stance as the opponent to land better calf kicks. Or Colby tried it against Kamaru in their second fight. But Allen is actually fast enough that he can hit it with the step up and it works perfectly. And he did it about 3 times at the start of this fight, and then it devolved into just swinging back 1-2s. But good win for Arnold Allen. Cool guy. As they say, Tesco meal deal is the best base for MMA. Rough for Dan Hooker, who now even more people are going to be like, he was never good to begin with. And you're going, no, you're a fucking idiot. He had some very good skills. He had some areas where he's not as strong. And he's made some weird decisions lately. And the weight cut one, I think, is definitely a weird decision given how big he is at lightweight. But then when you get out wrestled, what do? You go like, well, I need to be stronger. How do you be stronger? You go down to a lower weight class. But conversely, a lot of the guys who've had success being strikers and struggling with wrestling and so on have had more success by going up in weight and just being faster than their opponents and having the gas tank. Welterweight Hooker sounds weird, but he has a win over Gilbert Burns, top 5 welterweight, and he has a loss to Yaya Rodriguez at featherweight. So it's always nice, these fighters who sort of link people you would never put together. Jorge Masvidal has a loss to Rafael Assunção back in the day. But a win over Cesar, whatever his name is, the massive middleweight. And then Jack Shaw versus Timo Valiev. I might have overhyped this one in terms of how much I'm going to talk about it, but I really enjoyed it. Welsh GSP versus the last good Jackson Wink fighter. I think it was the Heavy Hands boys called him. But Valiev, I've had my eye on him since his last one because Randy Barcelos, very good fighter, very good boxer, sort of counter puncher. And that fight with Valiev is great. They're both working on a hair trigger. They both got really sharp eye for an opening and good power. So any punch that lands could just stumble the other guy. But this one was fun because Jack Shaw was trying to work behind his jab and his low kicks. Valiev was trying to get stuck in a bit more, but also used his own jab well in his own right. Both the takedowns and the get-ups were brilliant in this one. Both guys used butterflies wonderfully. Jack Shaw got taken down, or I can't remember, he got a kick call or something like that, but he got taken down and put on his back in the first round, and he grabbed double underhooks on the way down, used the butterflies to sit up, and then stood so that he was in a standing clinch with double underhooks, pulled right up underneath the guy's armpits, and was able to push him to the fence and get a takedown off that. Valiev actually timed some nice shots of his own. Valiev did a nice butterfly stand-up as well. Both guys were doing good stand-ups along the fence. If they got the underhook, they did a nice underhook stand-up. If they couldn't get the underhook, they'd turn their back and stand up into the back body lock and separate the hands. It was just really good all-round MMA. There was a really nice moment where Jack Shaw was against the fence in the clinch. He had his back to the fence and they were in an over-under clinch. And Valiev was trying to frame on the bicep so that he could bring in an elbow. And as he framed on the bicep, Jack Shaw swung what was his underhook underneath across his body and hit an arm drag. And he didn't get Valiev's back, but he got out from the fence. And it was just a really nice move. Because how often do you get the chance to arm drag people in MMA? Because it's all underhooks and overhooks. But when you start talking about striking clinches, you're going to be framing on biceps more, and that gives you the chance to pop it off and hit a quick arm drag behind the elbow. And then it was interesting because Jack Shaw, they call him Welsh GSP because he's all jabs and takedowns. But in this fight, he got more into it and took over when he got stuck in and started hitting. The good 1-2 along the fence, he really pushed in on Valiev and caught him along the fence and knocked him down briefly. But in the third round, he just stood his ground and threw a left hook, right hook, left hook. Something you'd never see him do normally. And that's how he got Valiev down in the third round. I think the two knockdowns definitely swung it for him because the fight, as I was watching it, I was going, damn, this is razor close. And then I went, oh no, he's dropped him twice. So I completely forgot about it because the action was just so back and forth and really very high standard, especially for two guys who aren't ranked. That's how mad this bantamweight division is. But yeah, I've rambled on for a while now. It's good to be back. I'm going to catch up on some fights. Tell me what was good from the last few weeks because I'm not going to watch shite. My palate is too refined to chug down 48 hours of shit fights. But I am going to catch up on like Borix, Burnell and all those sort of things. And I've got myself set up so that I can do a cheeky playthrough of Sifu at some point. Maybe this week, maybe next week, depending on how long it takes me to get this fucking capture card working. And then I'll be back on Wednesday, Thursday for the Boycast. And we're back in action. We're doing it all again. We're back to normal. And yes, I needed a break. It was fun, but I did miss fights during it. The first week, didn't give a shit. I was just there with my drink going, I don't even know there are fights happening. By the second week, I was going, oh, I'm itching for these fights. So yeah, it's good to be back, and I will see you Wednesday if you're a boy, and Monday if you're a barnacle on my podcast. I'm your boy, Jack Slack. If you want to send an email to podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to get in on the extra episodes and content and support the podcast, become a boy. Oh, including Advanced Striker 2.0 Volkanovski. That went up while I was away, which is a good read if you like low kicking and feints. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Abe Cower's life advice, bless.